We'll move on to the last session of the day one, that is TOS Shiksha Conclave of Teachers in Ophthalmology. I welcome Dr. Krishna Prasad as the moderator for the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. So at the outset, let me thank the TOS for such a robust and such a fantastic scientific program they have put up. I think the charm of conference is back, even though it's on a virtual format. I think we're really feeling those goosebumps of a real conference here because of the scientific content that has been lined up and the type of the so-called management that has happened throughout the day. It's really very nice to have TOS, okay, as the torchbearers of such a good conference management. I think now it's time to have something for the teachers. So we are ending this day with TOS Shiksha, that is a conclave of teachers in ophthalmology. So I invite all the panelists and all the chairpersons for this excellent program. And we have the expert panel, which is manned by Dr. Ashok K. Grover. Needless to say that he's probably one of the most well-known teachers of teachers, and Dr. Sujata Rathod from Bangalore, Dr. Anil Kulkarni from Sangli, a very senior examiner and teacher, Dr. Ramesh Babu from JIPMA Pondicherry, and we also have Dr. Giridhar Bellamkonda from Warangal, and Dr. Modini Pandarpurkar, who completes the list of such an expert panel who is going to oversee this program. And we have an excellent panel of teachers who are also the panelists, and they are discussing some very vital points, which are the take-home points for all the teachers of the country. So that this is also a time for interaction. We will go away with some very useful messages for the young teachers from the veterans and the seniors in this field of ophthalmic teaching. I think I invite all the, and of course we have Dr. Santosh Honavar, who is at the the helm of affairs. So obviously he's one of the greatest teachers that we have seen, and he's my teacher too. So over to Dr. Santosh, and this has been his brainchild. He will be setting the context, and with that we will roll the program with each topic one after the other. So over to Dr. Santosh.
Thank you, KP. I think you have already set the context. I just want to thank you for organizing this and all the eminent teachers who are here. The idea was just to have a meeting of minds and deliberate on some of the recent trends in teaching, and everybody has a take-home point, obviously. So that was the idea. That's it. So I think you can carry on with the session.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for saving some more minutes for us. You are always very crisp, but to the point. I think we will take where Dr. Santosh left. Obviously, these are small concepts that we are going to discuss. Every panelist who is going to speak, the speaker, will be speaking only for 6 minutes, and the next 3 minutes will be a discussion. We have an excellent panel, galaxy of experts in this field. I think each one will have some point to add on. I think once that 3 minutes of discussion, we can really generate some takeaway messages which can be extrapolated to our practice for making our ophthalmic teaching much more useful and very exciting. I think with that, I request our chairpersons to now start the program. With your permission, sir, I will call upon Dr. Natasha Radhakrishnan, who is from Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences. She's a vitreoretinal surgeon and a teacher par excellence. So she's going to talk about the real problem that the roles have now changed, the changing roles of ophthalmic teachers in the present day scenario of present day culture and present day technology. Over to you, Dr. Natasha. You have 6 minutes, and I request the chairpersons to do the timekeeping and also to stop the panelists once the 6 minutes are over, and also to take over the discussion.
So there are no timers here for the teachers?
There is a time.
No, we have to ring the bell only. The class stops after the bell.
No, there is a timer anyway. Can you put on the timer, please? All monitor. 6 minutes.
Good evening to all. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
First of all, let me thank Telangana Ophthalmic Society and Dr. Krishna Prasad and Dr. Santosh Honavar for this privilege to present in this setting today. So my topic is changing roles of an ophthalmic teacher in today's scenario. We have all been Yeah, so if we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of their tomorrow. John Dewey, a famous educationist, reformist, told us this. So that is what we are going to discuss today. So our own teachers, many of them were legendary, but many were unapproachable, partly because of our inhibition, because we placed them on a pedestal, partly because they themselves distanced from us. But we watched them and we learned, and we read and we learned. We read books and we learned, and we emulated them and we learned. But our horizons were always limited by their potential to mentor, because the way we could learn, from where all we could learn, was much more limited than today's generation. However, when you look at today's teachers, some of them are born teachers, some of them acquire the skill, and some of them just teach because they had teaching thrust upon them. Many of them are doing that to earn a living. Majority reach teaching by serendipity, by accident. Most of them have no formal training in teaching. Many don't have an aptitude to teach, and many of them concentrate on clinical work and let teaching take a back seat. But the importance of teachers is that we shoulder tremendous responsibility, and we should be aware of that. And we are collectively responsible for how the next generation of ophthalmic surgeons will perform, and indirectly for future of ophthalmic care of our whole community. So the challenges are that the roles have changed, technology has changed, attitude and approach of today's generation is not like ours, time limits have changed, expectations have changed, and in turn, horizons have expanded. Let us look at this, changing roles. In pedagogy, now, teacher-centered has changed to learner-centered, and learning becomes by the choice of the learner at their pace, at their time. Teachers facilitate this process, they inculcate and lay foundations for lifelong learning, and they make them produce output of their own learning. And however, there is changing technology to deal with, but do not fear it, because it is your friend and you have to learn to use it to your advantage. For example, the teaching mirror of an indirect ophthalmoscope, it was there from age old. We know, we all learned from seeing that. But now you have the video indirect ophthalmoscope. You can very easily show, when you have a video indirect ophthalmoscope, what the teacher is actually seeing through the ophthalmoscopy. You can see what your student is seeing. This kind of technology was easier for us to adapt because it was part of our work, and we managed to learn this much faster than we learned other technologies. OT teaching, for example, from the side mirror, it has now moved to video-based teaching. Classroom teaching and bedside discussions have given way to online teaching. And we all know the COVID scenario has literally fast-forwarded this path into online teaching because we had no other choice. Examinations have moved from classroom examinations to virtual vivas and virtual patients being given and discussed. But apart from technology in the ophthalmology itself, we need to teach smart and be smart. And in that, you can use simple things like your smartphone. You can image the fundus with your smartphone as you're examining the patient, and you can teach your students that. You can use apps like Kahoot for you to teach quizzing to the students. And the other thing to use is social media. Connect is the mantra. Follow, join, ask and tell, to use social media to your advantage. You can teach on WhatsApp, you can teach on Telegram groups, discuss cases, send pictures, give personalized feedback to your students. You have to go global. In today's scenario, you have to collaborate with other teachers and teaching institutions. We have to share information of ours and benefit from theirs. Give your students a broader teaching experience, and you can also involve them in collaborative research with other institutes. And our teaching has to go digital. In today's thing, no one wants to read from books. Our students love learning from online resources. So we can make our own digital library. We can do YouTube teaching channels. We can put our teaching out there for posterity. We can create shareable resources that the students can share among themselves, encourage e-portfolios where they keep everything that they have done through the year, and not just log books where they mechanically write down something or copy paste from somewhere else. So you can encourage them to keep e-portfolios. However, we are all limited by time. We are all busy clinicians and we don't have the time to teach is the usual refrain. But whenever you can and wherever you can, teaching should happen. We have the 1 minute preceptor, which is a simple, small thing that you can do in 1 minute. You just give the problem, you direct them towards the problem, ask their feedback, and then teach them what it is. Just that much will give them enough clinical input about one particular case. And you don't have to teach an entire topic. You can teach in small doses. And again, when it is digital, you can teach at your own time and your students' own time, which means it gives wings to time. And you, as a teacher, we should never stop learning. Being a teacher means to be a lifelong learner, not only about changes in your field, because outdated knowledge is not knowledge at all, but you also need to teach yourself how to teach. Not only in what to teach, but how to teach. Now we have medical education workshops that can teach you to, fine tune your teaching aspects. However, when we look at attitudes and expectations, today's generation doesn't believe in the work is a worship mantra. They want to work, learn. They also want to have their own enjoyment, and we should learn to respect that. We work less than our teachers very clearly. We take time out for family and hobbies. Next generation will do that more. So give them a model to emulate, teach them work-life balance, be a role model for life, not just as a clinician. Your students will watch your ethics, your punctuality, your smile, your clothes, how you treat your colleagues, patients, seniors, and staff. And they learn a lot more than ophthalmology from you. So be aware of that every single minute. And be aware of your digital footprint. You need to use your social media and digital media appropriately. And even if it's your personal life, remember that your students are watching. So create positive digital footprints that they can follow. While you have to be a guide and a mentor, don't forget to be a friend. And at some time, no subject should be taboo. At some time or the other, we have discussed tampons, birth control, premarital sex, everything with students, because that is what they need to learn from you. So for teaching, is a skill and an art, and mastering it is never possible. As long as we live, we learn and try to be better teachers. It's like life itself. It's hard work and constant work, but there's nothing more fulfilling than being a good teacher. Thank you for your patient hearing, and I submit this talk at the feet of my teachers, whose brilliance still continues to guide me in my path. Thank you so much.
Well, that was a very well worded and well spoken topic, Dr. Natasha. I'm Dr. Sujata.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you have taken the meaning of the, I think you must be knowing, and all of us know, that the word doctor comes from the Latin docere, and it means to teach. I think we have a dual role, one towards the patient and one is to teach our students. And yes, as you said, we have to leave a lot of digital prints, especially with the changing scenario of COVID. I think it's extremely important that we move towards living in a reality bridged digital world, and learning has to move more towards that. And yes, as you said, we have to be a friend and a counselor to all our students, and taking them step by step will make them a more real doctor in today's scenario. Thank you.
But Natasha, you have been a student yourself. So do you think that you get the same respect from your student that you are giving it to your teachers? Respect as in respect.
Yes, I think so. It is like I would say it's just like our fathers, isn't it? How we treated our fathers is not the way our children treat fathers and mothers, because you are more like a friend. Earlier, it was not like that. That distance was always there. Now it is not there, but that doesn't mean that the love or respect will go down. I don't think there is any lack of respect. Especially when you teach them the basics of what they need to do for the rest of their lifetime, they will always remember you with respect. It has been my feeling.
Krishna Prasad, I think that's a very mutual thing. Once you are taking care of the interests of the students, as Natasha very beautifully said, they will always love you. I mean, the ways of expressing it may not be the same as they used to be, but you will always find that they deal with you with that kind of a love and affection, which you give them when you are a true teacher. I think that is very important. The second aspect that I would like to point out is that lots of things have changed. We are changing very rapidly in technology, in terms of what our means of communication, what our means of linking with each other are. But the teaching in clinical sciences will always continue to have a lot of traditional mode, because there is a lot of feel, there is a lot of touch, there is a lot of things that must continue in person to person. So a combination of the traditional and the new in the right mix is probably the answer.
Absolutely, sir. There are some
very
things
rightly
that
you said,
cannot be digitally.
Madam, that people are more interested in clinical work. Like our assistants and fellows also used to say, sir, give us more surgeries, but don't give us that burden of teaching. But then everybody has to realize that unless somebody took that burden and taught you, you wouldn't have been a place where you are just now. So that is something which is important.
Just to say that teaching is not a burden, teaching is a joy.
Not to everybody.
Absolutely.
Like Natasha pointed out, yes, there are some on whom it's being thrust. I think the other faculty or heads of departments should have programs for the teachers as well, so that they are, I mean, sort of a interactive program where each one can hone their skills. And because everybody likes to be popular, and believe me, students do respect you if you teach in their own way. The way they show their respect may not be touching your feet or standing up when you enter a room, but yes, the respect is there and you can sense it. And it is a good idea to take along with you the faculty on whom it has been thrust, because it's a teamwork. One person cannot do it alone.
So in the end, that it's a very fulfilling life that if you are a teacher too, along with being a clinician. I think with that, we move to the next topic. That is Dr. Padma Malini Mahendradas from Bangalore. So we have two streams, DNB and MS. I think this gulf is slightly increasing. The kind of training in DNB and MS is not really the same. So now Dr. Padma Malini will tell us like how it is different and what it makes a difference to the teaching planning that we need to do for our country. Over to you, Dr. Padma Malini.
Respected chairpersons and dear friends, good evening to all of you. At the outset, I'd like to thank Dr. Santosh Honavar, Dr. Krishna Prasad and TOS team for inviting me here today to speak on how clinical training differs in DNB and MS streams. 6 minutes also, I would like to cover regarding the admission process, the course fee, the curriculum, and teaching methods and facilities, FAT assessment, thesis, theory and practical examinations, and regarding the bonds. I had an advantage of seeing both the systems. I did my diploma in the Medical College, Regional Institute of Ophthalmology. I did my DNB from a Prabha Clinic. So I've seen both the streams, and now I'm working for a DNB institution as a DNB coordinator. Here, I would like to share not only my view, my general opinion I've collected from most of the teachers. The entry to the PG entrance mostly occurs through the National Eligibility Entrance Test, what we call it as a NEET test, both for the MS and also for the Diplomate of National Board. Whereas we have Institute of National Importance Combined Entrance Test for the admission to PG courses of premium institutes like AIIMS, PGI Chandigarh, JIPMER and other AIIMS of 7 types. So this, if you get through that, students, they get through, it's difficult to get in, but once they get through, the training is excellent. So everyone would like to get into one of those institutes. By looking at the fees, it's so nominal. The tuition fee is about like, $250 per annum they pay in one of the primary institutes. This is for PGI Chandigarh. And the stipend they get around 90,000. Most of the institutes is varies between 80 to 90,000. And the leave pattern, they get about 90 plus days during the course. Coming to the DNB, the revised DNB course fee is about 1,47,000 per year, whereas MS course fee is variable from college to college or from place to place. It can go up to 25 to 30 lakhs per year in a private universities or private medical colleges. Coming to the stipend, DNB has fixed the minimum stipend of about 35, 37, 39 in different ages. And whatever the local government gives, the students has to get the maximum amount, whichever is higher. Coming to the basic science training, basic science classes are structured and taught in departments of anatomy, physiology, and pathology, and microbiology, the first year of MS in the respective departments of medical college. Whereas in DNB course, the structure is taught by the ophthalmologist with more focus to the clinical point of view. Coming to the teaching pattern, both DNB and MS have different curriculum. National Board Examination as a central control, they have a regular online teaching program. The classes varies from place to place. And passive learning and specialty training is more observed in DNB institutes. Coming to the clinical training, the seminars, case presentations, the journal club, the wet lab, and surgical training varies from place to place. The interdisciplinary postings are more structured in MS in medical colleges where they interact with other specialities. The exposure to eye-associated systemic diseases by cross-referrals, they get the knowledge. Coming to the surgical training, the basic training is done with the wet lab, or then they move on to the real surgical procedures. The surgical chances again varies from place to place. If they are in the regional institutes, they get more chances than to the smaller centers. The camp exposure and community ophthalmology training are present both in MS and DNB. Depending upon the institute, they get the exposure related to this community ophthalmology. Specialty training, so students are exposed to subspecialty ophthalmic training is by and large, they feel it's better in DNB institutes. The training and practice in the DNB institutions are much more advanced and they're exposed to the latest pieces of equipment and technologies. Coming to the thesis, the DNB has a research methodology course the candidate has to clear before they start the thesis. In medical colleges, have introduced biomedical research course. The certification is mandatory for the candidates. Now, not only the candidates, the teachers are also started doing this course. Coming to the thesis, the protocol is approved by National Board of Examination. The periodic evaluation is done during the FAT assessment regarding the logbook and also the thesis. Thesis goes for centralized correction. So the chances of corrections and rejections are higher in DNB. MS, it's most, they do interdepartmental thesis and the acceptance rate is easier in MS by the university. Next comes the formative assessment. It is there in both. The theory formative assessment is there in MS stream, whereas in DNB it is more structured. They do a theory examination, then the feedback session on theory is performed, then workplace assessment and the counseling is done. And here the candidates goes to the external place and with the external examiner. So more fine refinement occurs before the final exams. Coming to the theory exams, both the courses have 4 papers. What they observed was the recent advances in ophthalmology, students feel is tougher in DNB compared to MS. Coming to the practical exam, for DNB students, the examination center is different. No internal examiner. There is no long case. Now with the COVID pandemic, we are moving towards the ASCII system. In the MS, the internal examiner is there and they have a long case, short case in different format. If the candidate fails in the practicals after passing the theory, then they can have 3 attempts. Totally after passing the theory, they can take 3 attempts of practical exam. If they fail, then they have to take up the theory. Whereas in MS, if the candidate fails, they need to take up the theory again, even for the second attempt. Next comes the bond. The bond no bond is there in the DNB, whereas the bond is there in the MS system. It varies from the region, the state to state. Suppose if they have to, it is the duration of the bond with the penalty amount they have to break. So highest bond is there in the Odisha, Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand, it goes in crores. The Chandigarh and Delhi, Haryana have no bonds. That's why more candidates likes to go there. And also the second is more. DNB is no bond. DNB is popularity in the Middle East and Europe. Candidates choose academics as a career option. Then they prefer MS or MD. To conclude, the curriculum is uniform across the India from Kashmir to Tamil Nadu in DNB, whereas in MS is variable. Fee structure is uniform in DNB, in MS is variable. Stipend is variable in both the courses. The FAT is uniform in DNB, but the pattern is variable in MS system. In DNB, the seats are less, so the less students are there. In MS, there could be more students. Institute, no role in the final exam in the DNB. MS, they have a role. The training, the specialty training is more in DNB. The basic science training is good in MS system. So coming to the thesis, the rejection possibility is there in DNB. The chances of acceptance is more in MS system. Exam, by and large, they feel tough to clear DNB, but now the percentage of pass is increasing. MS is easy to pass. As I mentioned earlier, MS has a bond in certain states, whereas DNB does not have. It's not only the view what I put across, I also collected the views from. I like to acknowledge my teacher, Dr. Vijay Raghavan, Dr. Rima Bansal from Chandigarh, and Perenaki, Dr. Banant Bhandari and Dr. Shailaja regarding the private medical colleges, and Dr. Lucy, Dr. Zulekha and Aditi from the students' point of view. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Padma. I think you stirred the hornet's nest, actually. I think our expert panel must be really itching to ask you some questions or to discuss. Over to you, sir.
Madam, I have worked as a teacher in both for MS as well as for DNB. And what I find is what you very rightly said, that the question of practical exposure and the equipments is much more in the DNB institutes. But if you think about the structural training as far as basic sciences are concerned, the MS still scores better. See, passing in MS is because more of a personal relations as well as the familiarity of the student with the teacher. But otherwise, I don't think there should be too much of a difference in the passing percentages. As far as surgical work is concerned, the MS people get a lot of more surgeries than a DNB students. So there are certain advantages and certain disadvantages. But I think as a teacher, our job is to do whatever is maximum for these students, whether they are coming for DNB or whether they are coming for MS.
One small point, madam, like you talked about the FAT, we do have quarterly clinical assessment exams also, where we mark the students. As yet, the NMC has not included those in the final marks, but that is shortly coming. So there is a FAT clinical assessment as well, in addition to the theory.
I think it's very difficult to compare these two face to face because there can be a very good DNB institute and not so good MS setup and vice versa. And just like Dr. Anil Kulkarni sir said, there can be in the DNB setups, you can have probably a lot of surgeries, especially NGO hospital related DNB setups where they can do lots of surgeries. Where in some colleges where there are more students and very little clinical or a community outreach, they may do very less surgeries also.
Yes.
But I think the point is the thing is employability, like which course makes a student employable is a $1 million question to actually answer. Rover sir, what do you say?
In the government system, sir,
I agree with you with regard to the quality of teaching and the standards for teaching that are followed. It is largely institution based because the enforcement at the moment is not that much. So in either case, it will be dependent on the institution, including the quality of the teaching and the quality of the surgical work, that exposure that the person gets. It's largely at the moment dependent on the quality of the institution and the devotion of the people there to try and teach those postgraduates. So I think that is the most important factor at this moment.
Think about the thesis, what you said. I think the thesis, even in an MS, is actually corrected from an external source only. I think. I mean, I think any MS teachers here?
Yeah.
It is external source.
External.
Both external and internal assessment.
sent to other medical colleges,
Other medical colleges.
other state who are going to correct it.
I think with that, we come to the most tricky situation in a PG training. I think whenever we just had an interview, fellowship interview yesterday, we were asking how many surgeries you have done in your MS. Okay, the figures are little, deplorable, but I think that is one of the parameters for a student to decide the quality of the training. So the surgical training has been a real fiasco in India. I think to cover this topic, we have Dr. Saravana Bhava from the Lotus Eye Care Salem. Dr. Saravana Bhava, you can probably start your talk, sir.
Yes. Very good afternoon. Am I audible and are the slides visible?
Yeah, clear and audible.
Yeah. A very good afternoon to the chairpersons. And at the very outset, I want to thank the organizers, the Dr. Santosh and team who has done a marvelous conference. And coming to the surgical training FASCO, surgical training is an integral part of the any PG curriculum. Ironically, is faced with failures and challenges. So I would just take you through the NMC guidelines for the competency-based postgraduate training program in MS in ophthalmology. Of the highlights here, minor surgical procedures must be known and performed independently as listed here. Coming to the other surgical procedures, the candidate should know and perform independently ocular anesthesia and all of the ocular anesthesia, and independently perform and deal with the complication arising from the following surgery: the lid surgery, the district procedures, sac surgery, strabismus surgery, orbital surgery, and cyclodestructive procedures. The postgraduate should be conversant with the use of operating microscope and must be able to perform the surgery listed below competently under the same. For the first year, the candidate should be well versed with ECC, and second year, it is stated as intracapsular, and third year, phacoemulsification. Moving on, the vitreous procedures, the candidate should have assisted vitrectomy procedures, scleral buckling, and should know basic vitrectomy procedures, ocular surface procedures like tracheum and others, glaucoma trabeculectomy, and other surgery. Corneal procedure, corneal tear repair and suturing has to be known by the student. And student should have performed and assisted the following microscopic surgery in cornea, the keratoplasty, and a few other glaucoma surgeries as listed, apart from trabeculectomy. It is desirable for the candidate to do the following laser procedure: yak capsulotomy, laser iridotomy, focal and panretinal photocoagulation. Candidate should have assisted and have a knowledge of photorefractive procedures. Going on, in a nutshell, the candidate should perform the extraocular, intraocular surgeries and assist the cases of surgical specialties. Further on, in the first phase, the candidate should be trained for the preparation of the cases. Next phase, assist the operation. Third phase should operate independently. With that, we have the mammoth number of postgraduates who are going to take up the next current PG courses in various streams as shown here, to the tune of 48,608. And what are all the deterrents? The main deterrent is the less number of cases, because most of them are being covered by the mobile eye care centers, eye hospitals, eye care procedure. And year on year, the postgraduate intake has been increased. And similarly, the ratio has been from student to professor has been increased from 1:2 to 1:3, as shown here. Above all, the corona pandemic has taken a blow, and it has literally stopped this surgical training for these postgraduates. What are the possible pursuit problems by the PG students? Less number of surgical hands-on as pertaining to OT or OPD procedures, less number of cataract cases, lack of postgraduate training for phacoemulsification, less variety of surgical cases for training, less time allotted for performing surgery, especially during the end of the day. Coming to the other pursuit problems, the postgraduate junior is left to be assisted with the senior, and there is the full set of instrument is not there when the PG is operating. PG doesn't go to operate the high-end phaco machine and the microscopes. PG never allowed to operate on the difficult cases. Further on, the postgraduate supported with the blunt second-grade instrument, blades and scissors. Disparity in number of cases amongst the postgraduate. Postgraduates trained in camps and sub-optimal OT setups. Then what are all the PG inputs to overcome these failures? Provision of more number of surgical hands-on trainings, training of common day-to-day procedures like cataract, tracheum and others, surgical training by an expert faculty, surgical training for the whole case and the entire case, surgical training for variety of cases. Further on, provision of microscope, compulsory foot training, training in dealing the complication during the routine cataract surgeries. Tie up with another community-based or higher eye care centers for surgical training for postgraduates, provision of training in standard OTs with higher-end phaco machine and a microscope. And remedy for all this, the prior training in wet lab and virtual reality is a prerequisite for any surgical training for the postgraduate. And patient selection is at most importance, not all cases or teaching cases as shown here. And surgical training on camp patients for the postgraduates is recommended, step surgeries, and surgical trainings for novice postgraduate by an expert, compulsory comprehensive surgical training in cataract and other common surgical procedures, training for complete surgical procedures starting from start to finish, at least for cataract. Further on, the more number of free cases has to be allotted for the PGs instead of faculties who are otherwise trained. Regular updation of surgical logbook, rectification of previous mistakes, OSCE, OSCAR evaluation, scrutinization of the surgical videos by the PGs and applying timely necessary correction. OSCE, OSCAR, there's a rubrics for SACS for the capsulotomy. You see so much of involved as for training a simple capsulotomy, and it goes from novice to well-trained postgraduate. Further on, we have the remedies, complete monitoring of the surgical procedure by the trained faculty, and bailing them out during the complication by managing appropriately, training PGs on paying on private cases, providing few steps at least in the paying cases also is worth doing, especially alternate suturing, IA, and trenching, which will not affect the surgical output. Further allowing the surgical, PGs to perform minor procedures like surgical excision of pterygium when the trainer himself is performing phaco. Future is the robotic eye surgery. I would take your attention on the last slide here. This is a step surgery. The trainer can select an array of a procedure from this, starting from conjunctival excision, which can be thought, or a superrectus bridle, or a corneal tunnel. In the blue, I want you to draw your attention to the 6th number slide. The trainer can create a blue tunnel there, and the trainee can further on extend on both the sides. Similarly, the capsulotomy creation and the nucleotomy and the nucleus expression, the IOL insertion. If the trainee is a novice, he can be thought to be putting the IOL over the iris. If it is a trained trainee, then he can be allowed to put the intraocular lens in the back, and he can be allowed to perform the IA and also the suturing as and when required in a SSCS procedure. I have selected SSCS because it is having a gamut of presentation for the training for the students. With that, I thank my teachers and the organizers. Thank you all for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saravana. I think you have covered the single most important shortcoming in the residency system today in the country. And it is this which is the biggest bugbear. Whenever I've spoken to people over the last 44 years in ophthalmology, the residents all over where I've interacted, or all the surveys that have been done amongst postgraduates, Krishna Prasad is one of those who's carried out many of those interactions. And this one shortcoming is creating a big gap in our education, where we have a good superstructure, where we have the best surgeons, the best videos, we win most of the awards, and where the gloss is very good, but the base remains hollow because people have not trained. And that is why they seek to get their training in the fellowships of comprehensive ophthalmology or going to other institutions. The reasons, number one, motivation by teachers. I think motivation of teachers has to be improved, and this has to become a part of the DNA and part of the curriculum, a well-enforced curriculum which and makes sure that this number of cases are done, well documented and shown to have been done. Minimum number of procedures by residents have to be delineated in each curriculum, and they have to be strictly enforced, I think. And then, of course, the question of having the right kind of equipment, the right kind of assistant microscopes, the right kind of wet labs, and the other things in infrastructure come in. But the first and foremost will be the motivation has to be created amongst the teachers that this is an essential must, and this must be enforced by the enforcement authorities.
Yes, sir. With the permission of the chair, if you could add on one point. Nowadays, in the current era, we have so many ways of learning, either by the teacher or without the teacher, especially the theoretical aspects and surgical steps also. But the surgical training is the one which the candidate has to personally perform, and he need to better on that. Thank you.
So one of the bigger problem is because there is a disparity in the teaching programs which are being conducted by various institutions. If you take about DNB's institutions, some are NGOs where you get a lot of work, and some are private hospitals where there is hardly any work because the private patients are not being touched even by the DNB students. Similar is for the medical colleges. If the teacher himself is not proficient in the surgery, the rest of the people suffer. And if he's very good in the surgery, he doesn't allow his residents to do anything.
Motivation.
That is the biggest problem. And I think the problem lies with us teachers, and I don't think it lies with the students.
Agreed.
Sir, I have one point to make.
All or none phenomena is very difficult to start off to give it to a student, because the likelihood of visual prognosis is very dependent on the skill in the surgery. So we must have much more emphasis on wet labs and simulated learning before the student can start with the surgeries.
Structured way of teaching and learning.
I think
Yeah,
Dr. Nitya said it
absolutely.
right. It's about the balancing the patient rights. The patient rights for a good vision, because they're training on the real patients. So I think we need to balance the surgical training versus the patient rights of the patient. So what one point is, I think we have so many people from different institutions. Is this lackadaisical approach because it is not a part of your examination requirement that the student, if he does not perform a cataract surgery proficiently, he will not be awarded MS? Is it the reason that it is not included as a parameter for passing that the surgical training is in such a situation?
Stricter monitoring by our licensing authorities, is by NMC, by National Board, will be integral to our doing
Yes,
it.
sir. Any practical exam has cataract surgery hands-on, that surgery as a requirement for passing?
It
No.
used to be always a part of the examination in Rajendra Prasad Center in the All India Institute, but it was later discontinued
Why, sir?
because of the factor that the candidate may be nervous, the result may affect the patient's eye, and you may not have the best assessment because of the anxiety of the exam and so on.
I think we have
How do you use the models?
for it.
For that, the answer will be models and simulated.
Models and
For
simulators.
assessment, you can do models.
Yeah.
Absolutely. To get good simulators and wet lab.
But then they're all so expensive at present. Hardly any hospital gets to use them.
I think that's why the Dr. Deepti
Sorry
Joshi
to
positioned
interrupt,
here.
sir.
Innovative. So we have to look at innovative methods of simulation.
Number one, motivation has to improve to teach. And the protocols for safety exist all over the globe, where they have really defined how to monitor
Sorry to-
the stepwise progression of the candidate to make sure that the patient is not harmed and the learning does take place.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. Can we move on to the next speaker?
I think Arpita, I mean,
Yes,
we
sir.
all in charge. I think we have more time. We have time up to 6:30. We have only 5 more talks. That's why we are actually taking the discussion. Okay, thanks for reminding us. I think we'll now go on to Dr. Deepti Joshi, the pediatric ophthalmologist at MM Joshi, Hubli. And she has a penchant for wet lab, innovations in teaching, especially the surgical training through wet lab. Over to you, Dr. Deepti.
Hello.
Hello.
Namaskara. Namaskara. Hede. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. At the outset, I would like to thank Krishna Prasad sir, Honavar sir, and TOS for this wonderful opportunity. Well, so my topic is innovations in wet lab training. So we all know that ophthalmology is a microsurgical branch, and be it an anterior segment surgery like cataract, a posterior vitreoretinal surgery, or an extraocular squint surgery, we all need to have a precise hand-eye coordination. And that is why a wet lab plays a very important role in our setup. Basically, it increases the chances of success and decreases the chances of complications. The most common innovations which have been noted till date in the wet lab has been the hybrid eye and the simulators. So what is this hybrid eye? Hybrid eye is basically when we put in a human nucleus into an animal nucleus or into an artificial eye, as is being shown here. So we basically make a rhexis, we can practice the phaco per se in the artificial eye or within the nucleus of the goat eye by microwaving, and then you make a small trench and then you place the human SICS nucleus in that trench, and you have to practice the phacoemulsification. The major advantage in this technique is that by using just a single goat eye or by using a single artificial phaco practice eye, we can practice up to 3 to 4 human nucleus, and 3-4 students can learn simultaneously. So it is basically cost effective. The simulators which I talked about, there is wide range of simulators available. That is Help Me See simulators, which teaches SICS, the Bionica simulators, the artificial intelligence mentoring, which has come now with the usage of Alexa and all. But now that the COVID has risen in the past 1.5 years, the CAM surgeries have gone down. There is actually a paucity of the nucleus. So the hybrid surgeries, which we were teaching till date in the wet lab, has gone down. And the simulators, as Natasha madam pointed out just now, is quite costly for an institution or a college to actually invest in it. So we thought about what is this cost efficient yet quite efficient with respect to outcome and the quality. What are these modifications in the wet lab which we can do during this COVID era so that our students get proficient in their surgeries? And that is when we came up with this idea. When the whole world is going vegan in this lockdown, why can't we go vegan in our wet lab too? The 4 most important steps that our students were facing problem was in suturing, tunnel, capsulorhexis, and in phacoemulsification. So coming to the first, that is the phacoemulsification, we basically use the potato model. So we basically boiled the potato in a microwave for about 15 to 20 minutes till it becomes about medium hard. And then we scooped out the central soft portion with a spoon. So as shown in this video. So once that has been done, that small portion which we scooped out, with the help of either a knife or with the help of either a scalpel, we basically shaped it into the size and shape of a human nucleus, which we got by the SICS, and we placed it into the same phaco eye which we used to practice previously with the human nucleus. It gives about NS2 to 3 hardness, and you can actually do all the types of chops in this, the potato nucleus too. The next came about the suturing. So how do we teach them suturing? The mostly used non-conventional technique is basically using the thermocol to which our sutures come attached. So over that we draw a line and we teach. This is how even I practiced my suturing during my PG days, and the student goes around practicing around that line the various types of sutures, continuous, intermittent, or the mattress sutures can be practiced. But how about the complicated sutures? So for that, we actually selected the onion. So in that, you can actually practice the onion. The consistency of the onion is more or less like a scleral or the corneal consistency. So you can actually practice making out a dark button. A trephine was taken out. We placed it on the base of the onion, and we give a small hint to the students as to how to practice the suturing as we do in case of a penetrating keratoplasties. So directly before they go in and do a PK suturing in case of over a patient, they can actually try this technique of suturing over the onion. So all the symmetrical sutures, the length, the symmetry of all the 8 or 16 sutures can be noted over the onions. The next was basically capsulorhexis. So with respect to capsulorhexis, the most vegan method which we used included a grape or a tomato, slightly boil it for about 10 seconds so that there is a steam which goes between the skin peel as well as the pulp, and it makes the rhexis easier. So draw a circle and make a rhexis continuously around it. So make it curvilinear. You have a border around which you can do. So multiple times you can practice a rhexis on a single tomato actually. Grapes, just possible once. Believe me, it's quite tough considering the size of it. The next one, the last one which I'm talking about would be the tunnel. So for that, I've already showed the onion model, but the other thing which can be used is the lemon. So over the lemon, you can actually practice the SICS tunnel by making a small circle which mimics the cornea, and then you make a tunnel. Or you can practice the trabeculectomy flaps. The partial thickness which is needed in the sclera, similar partial thickness can be practiced here, also telling them that some amount of the luminescence of the first knife should be seen when you are making the tunnel. A SFIUL, but the tunnel can also be used and practiced here. This part I have actually picked up from KS Kumar sir. He has gone one step ahead with respect to lemon, and he has even practiced vitreoretinal surgeries, which we are now using in our hospital also. So you can practice placing buccal. You can cut the lemon, scoop out all the tissues, and through the peel of the lemon, you can place the trocar, you can place the light bulb, and he has used the same, the anterior capsulorhexis which has been taken up. He has placed it inside, and an ILM peel has also been practiced using just a lemon. So I would say that innovation doesn't always mean inventing new things. It also means utilizing already existing things in a very different way. So with this small few positive things, if we can bring up a ray of hope in our postgraduates in this negative pandemic era, I think it would be really useful for them in their long way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deepti, for those fabulous innovations. I think that will make a huge difference to everybody. I think you should let them be known much wider so that a lot of people can use these innovations. And particularly in these COVID times, this will be very useful. But before I end, I may just congratulate all of you for India having won the gold in javelin, which was not expected. So gold in javelin in athletics is a major landmark over 50 years, even before I started practicing ophthalmology.
Bronze in wrestling, sir.
Bronze in wrestling too. So, but gold is gold.
Gold is gold.
गोल्ड तो हमेशा लड़कियां लाती थी, इस बार थोड़ा हमारा भी
एक आध बार तो
But really great. I mean, athletics, nobody thought India can ever get a medal, let alone a gold. Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Deepti.
I think we always thought of potato chips. I think this potato chops is something you want it to be more popularized. Okay.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you, sir.
I think I would like to congratulate Deepti and say yes, during this COVID. Hello?
Hello. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, during this COVID scenario, as we all saw that our surgical training of our students was the one which really faced a real threat. I think this would be a very, very innovative way to definitely try and motivate our students to come up and learn the procedures. That was an excellent presentation.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think I also watch for the phaco training because those plastic eyes are very cheap, like 150 rupees. And it can be used the whole day. Just if you have a good SACS camp surgery going on, collect all the nucleus and all types of hardness, and you can probably get that same feel of the. So once somebody does around 10 nucleus emulsification, they will be a lot better when they actually face the real case. I think this is probably a way of maintaining the patient safety, especially in phaco emulsification.
Very interesting presentation, Dr. Deepti. Enjoyed watching it. And
Thank you, ma'am.
definitely is the way to go because we are promoting more wet lab techniques. So we could use this in the wet lab as well in routine times, COVID or no COVID. Very interesting.
Thank you, ma'am.
I just want to add one point. The Akruti artificial eye is very, very, handy as far as phaco training is going on.
Yes.
We used it for our Tamil Nadu Ophthalmic Association training for those who had enrolled for the phaco session. It gives the same feeling as you do for the phaco, and it's something like a wax. So that keeps, having a same feeling as the human eye.
Baba, it's the Akriti eye only. After one wax is over, we put the nucleus.
Oh, we can put the nucleus. That's a great idea. Great ideas. Great idea.
Despite cutting open, actually it maintains the anterior chamber stability. So that is one advantage of Akriti.
Yes,
eye.
madam, you can train them to do the tunnel and side ports and
Yes,
so many things for so many candidates. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I think thanks, Dr. Deepti. I think now it's time to move on to the real crux of the problem for a student is to pass the exam, especially the practical exam. Theory they somehow manage, but practicals is where a lot of their histrionics, their articulation, their real stage fright becomes a big problem. I think Dr. Sandhya Ramchandra, who has worked in various medical colleges at the helm of affairs, has been an examiner for a long time. She has tremendous experience in what really goes wrong with the students in an exam and how actually to use those inputs to prepare them during their post-graduation so that they can be fearless for their practical exam. Over to Dr. Sandhya.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna Prasad. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, TOS, and the scientific committee for giving me this opportunity. Is my screen visible and am I audible before I start? Yes. Yeah, thank you so much. So, my task is to talk how to prepare residents to face practical exams without fear. So from this to move on to this is the task ahead. Sorry. Yeah. So once I was just asking my postgraduates to look at this and tell them which resembles that, like choose the most formidable one, theory exam, practicals, viva, examiner. And surprisingly, the answer was practical exam. And next it was the examiner. And then when I asked them why, they said that it is mostly because it is unpredictable, and they do also have some performance anxiety, probably because they don't know what to expect. So I'll try to, in the next few slides, tell how to prepare the postgraduates, when to start preparing and where, and whom should we prepare, the examiner or examinee or the system. So what to prepare. So that is what I'm trying to address. Medicine is one of the earliest, most respected and highly selective and aspired profession. But what if such a profession comes tainted with imperfections? What if the medical learners prove practically unprepared in their daily training and assessment? This is the whole crux of the matter for having a PG practical exam. So if we have an incompetent practitioner, we know what happens. Therefore, the need of the hour is capacity building by competency-based training. Is it something so special done somewhere else? No, it is a part of everyday training. And we have to define the standards, and the standards have to be universally accepted. What I mean is, if a postgraduate who is trained in a remote rural medical college, he must be as competent as someone who is trained in a reputed postgraduate institute of long standing. So as the task is horrendous, there are no quick fixes. Who should change? We are all familiar with this mythological figure, because we are so fond of telling, look, no one taught me, I taught myself. We used to have 1,000 cases in the OPD. There were no classes. So we were all probably Ekalavyas, probably. And look at this mythological figure. This is Uttara Kumara, who ran away from the battlefield, and we don't want our PGs to be like that. So what is that we are supposed to do? We are supposed to build competency. Look at this. So this boy, this cartoon is telling, I taught the dog how to whistle. So he says, I don't hear him whistling. So what is the answer? I said, I taught him. I didn't say he learned it. So this is what we are at. We all know this person, Pullela Gopichan, and we know what is training, and we are only teaching students. A feedback of the learning pyramid, where an average student retention rates are given, is like that. So lectures have less than 5% retention. And look at this pyramid, 90% of the retention happens when they teach others, and 75% when they practice doing. So for a postgraduate to be successful in the exam, he should have practiced whatever is being expected of him. Medical education today is fraught with many challenges. This is just a long list, and I'm not going into that. Look, what about our exam system? For a fair selection, he's saying everybody has to climb the tree. So like our postgraduates are like this, the whole assorted lot, and their competencies may be different. Someone may be very good in theory, but he may be poor in practicals. But what is our assessment system looking at? This is what the postgraduates feel, that there is a lot of unpredictability, and it is high time that we bring in some standardization. I'm just putting up this Bloom's taxonomy, which is very, very useful to understand what is the level of competency a student is. So knowledge is just recall, memorization. So nobody looks at this. We need to make the postgraduates go to the stage of application and analyze. Probably this is what we assess in the practical exam, where we give them some charts, case scenarios, etc. And next higher orders are where they go to create, and that is probably at the level of fellowship. So this is something called Miller's pyramid. Most of the educationists are aware of it. So facts like MCQs or theory questions. So the postgraduate knows only facts. This is tested in the theory or MCQ. Next comes the level of interpretation and application. This is what is tested in practicals to some extent, and actually a practical exam should test how he can demonstrate something, what he has learned. And this has come up in the recent years in the forms of OSCEs. If we know most of the exams, like fellowship exams in the UK, where the postgraduate is asked to do something and there is no input from the examiner, and the examiner only looks at what you're doing. So we have a lot of dilemmas in postgraduate education. So what we need to do is to bring in competencies. Competencies is nothing but something he should do activity in everyday life, and that can be brought in the form of EPAs. EPA is nothing but an interestable professional activity. For example, I may ask a postgraduate to do gonioscopy. It's a procedural EPA, or a disease-oriented EPA, or a functional EPA, like how to conduct a screening camp. And our exams must be based on this so that the postgraduate feels very confident that he's able to do something. Finally, the exam is what prepares him for something in practice in real life in the days to come. So a postgraduate may be a novice in the beginner, and he becomes proficient at least by the time he gives his examination, and expert later when he actually practices. So once we convince the postgraduate and go in a structured way and keep milestones of learning, his fear of practical examination will eventually vanish. So the mantra is to have observable professional activities, entrust them with little activities, and monitor the milestones so that he goes to the examination without any fear. So I will just skip this. And this is the new CBME, which says the undergraduate has to have all these characters, and definitely the postgraduate has to have more of them. Where are we? So it is time for us to introspect. And we should actually start the change from ourselves. And we need to move from the stage of a teacher to a facilitator. We are not anymore a teacher, a student delivery of learning, but it should be an exchange where the goal is not knowledge acquisition, but knowledge application. And once the student knows this, he'll be more confident in the practical exam. So the tool of assessment has to change, the method of teaching has to change, and the transition to practice will be very smooth once the postgraduate is equipped with all these competencies. So the two words that I would like to stress in this are the EPS, which are entrustable professional activities which we can do as workplace-based assessment on a daily basis. And they develop competencies and they're able to demonstrate. So they can teach their juniors or other students, and they can be very confident of doing this in the exam. So let us also make the learning very fun, and therefore we can integrate as one of the important parts was a wet lab that Dr. Deepti was telling. So this is one thing which I very tell. Proptosis is when you see a spotter in the exam. Epiphora is when you see your marks. Ptosis is when you are interpreting. Most of the students go on reading the chart without looking up. Probably they develop transient ptosis then. This is just to make fun of it. So at the helm of affairs is nothing but competency-based postgraduate training. We should move from cognition to behavioral level of assessment so that we are answerable and we are accountable and we are able to train the future doctors. So we are probably in this stage, and we need to move on to a stage where the postgraduate is able to evaluate some things and create new. Thank you for your patient hearing, and I hope this answer next time would be that the most formidable thing is the examinee, and the examiners need to come prepared to examine the students of the future. Thank you. I think I should replace this with the gold medal now. Thanks for your patient hearing. I would be glad to answer any of the questions, and once again express my thanks for the organizers and the chairpersons for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sandhya. And to tell everyone that she has already worked on the competency-based medical education training. She has already brought in a book for a guide for all the teachers in ophthalmology, how to use competency-based medical education for the undergraduation.
Madam, when we were residents, we came out with MS examination and confident to start the practice or to go in the teaching. When the question of fellowships came, once we saw that the fellows are the ones who are now more confident. Now the time has come that even after fellowships, people are becoming so much small, narrow-minded and oriented that they really cannot practice outside. Only they have to stick to their institutions alone. So I think somehow it is deteriorating as far as the level of our PGs are concerned. Whosoever is the responsibility for that.
So are the exams now what the students are going on? I mean, they go through the exams, no evaluation. As Dr. Sandhya said, it's actually a very formidable task to bring in all the fairness into the exam. I think in trying to be fair, sometimes we kind of open the net and all, as you said, little half-baked products also move out of the net. So I think between the two, Dr. Sujata, what is fair? Should we really tighten the net and try to see that we don't get the half-baked products out? Did they really come back with another 6 months of preparation? Or probably we should give them a benefit of doubt looking at the whole situation?
No, I think the responsibility of every teacher is to put out a good clinician into the society. If we are strictly looking at that, and with the best communication skills and the competency-based skills, we should have a uniformity in teaching, uniformity in learning, and uniformity in examination, which is definitely a difficult task. Each institute has their, I mean, there are basic standards, but yes, they would try to say that their percentage level is higher in this institute than the other. So there are places where compromise happens. But I would like to be a tough examiner and insist that there has to be a competence which is to be looked at more than any other easy way out. So it is extremely important that the fear of teachers should not be there, but it should be that the teacher has so much motivation that he's done his best and he wants to see the best clinician into the society.
I'll ask one direct question. What about OSCEs? Do you think OSCEs will be a fairer and a better way of evaluation than long cases and more of, memory-based teaching, memory-based evaluation?
Yes, I personally feel that is a better way of evaluating our students.
Because Dr. Santosh is analyzing. The analysis is only through OSCEs. Yeah.
But the OSCEs have to be standardized.
Exactly, uniformity.
Yes. So we have to have easy, like 50% of the OSCEs can be easy so that everybody gets it, and we can increase the difficulty grades. So it is a collective thought of the entire teacher community and not an individualized one. So there is a requirement for national consensus.
Absolutely. The uniformity.
Yeah. So I was mentioning the EPS where run a clinic, like if they say run a diabetic retinopathy screening clinic, so that is a EPA. That's a responsibility where the student has to do everything, registering, taking history, exam, IDO, even OCT. So he will do everything. So that is a big responsibility. So tomorrow, if he goes out in the community, he'll be able to do that. So we need to structure our OSCEs in a futuristic or practical point of view. That is my point.
Realistic scenarios.
Yes.
Okay. I think with that, we move to the next topic. I think the teaching has really been taking different turns and it is changing and transforming, and we have to keep up with the pace. And just like we had innovations in wet lab training and surgical training, even the teaching methodologies have changed. The teachers, the erstwhile teachers, they were teaching in a particular way, but today's teachers have to kind of change and innovate themselves, reinvent themselves for a better, positioning themselves in the present day scenario. We have Dr. Uma Kulkarni, a very passionate teacher, professor from Ennapoya, Mangalore, who has worked on innovations in the medical teaching. So over to Dr. Uma, you can please share your screen.
Yes, sir. First of all, thank you, Dr. Santosh. Thank you, Dr. Krishna Prasad and TOS for giving me this opportunity, 6 minutes opportunity for presentation. I will start with, sorry for that. Okay. So I'm Dr. Uma Kulkarni, professor in ophthalmology from Ennapoya Medical College, Mangalore. So I start with my topic, which I have divided into 4 small segments. First is seeing is believing, whether that's true. Second, animating is experiencing. My experiences I'll be sharing. Simulating is stimulating, and DP has already spoken a bit about it. And quizzing is learning. These are my 4 main domains in which I'm going to speak. And we know that human eye is very complicated and very layered structure. Each structure is different from each other. Some are transparent, some pigmented, some invisible. It's such a complicated structure that each and every student who joins ophthalmology, either as a postgraduate student or as an undergraduate student, or even if for that matter, an optometry student, is like the Seshan Avasti, in front of whom each structure we are introducing one after the other, the cornea, retina, and all those structures. which are very complicated for a beginner to understand. And I think to begin with in ophthalmology, we need to give them a very good knowledge about the basic anatomy of the eyeball. And therefore, traditionally, we use these techniques. We tell them, draw this diagram of the cross section of the eye 10 times till you get it right. But that doesn't help because it doesn't give the experiential form of learning. It just tells him how to draw the diagram. There are 3D models which are available of plastic, silicon and all that, which help them to some extent, but not completely. The best choice would be a human cadaveric eye, but that's not always possible because the dissection eyeballs which are available from the anatomy dissection hall are quite shriveled and disintegrated and are quite old. And therefore, they're not so useful to simulate a normal human eye. And therefore, that becomes a little difficult to get them also. The best simulator for human eye is actually the porcine eye, but that again is difficult to get. So in our institution, what we tried out is the goat's eye. Goat's eye has been used everywhere for teaching surgeries also, but as a bridge course, what we would recommend is the dissection of the goat's eye, enucleated eye, in the form of a sequential and exploratory learning of each and every structure of the eye, each and every cavity of the eye, each and every attachment of the structures of the eye. It helps in elucidating a complicated topic that, like the structure of the eye, the different layers of the cornea, different structures at the angle of the anterior chamber. It gives a three-dimensional perspective of this for the students to say that, okay, this is the posterior chamber, this is the anterior chamber, they see the depth so less. All these aspects can be brought out very well with dissection, not once, but repeatedly. It is best when aided by a systematic commentary and interaction by an expert. Because of the novelty of the teaching method, it's very acceptable to the students and becomes very interactive teaching. Its closest experience it gives is to the human real eye. So that's because understanding the ocular anatomy is the keystone for understanding ophthalmology. If a student has not understood the ocular anatomy, then understanding ophthalmology becomes very difficult. They also learn through feeling and touching the tissues. When they hold the tissues in the hand, the lens, the vitreous, the retina, so thin, fragile, the cornea, they learn through this. They understand the thickness of cornea is 0.5 millimeter. They are just numbers, but when they actually feel it, they understand it better. They learn through peer groups when they work in groups and dissect the eye. So it really instills interest, attentiveness. It helps in clinical correlation. Oh, this is what is done in evisceration, whereas this is what is done in enucleation. It helps in clinical correlation and helps in mindfulness of the teachers as well as the students. Again, it is very repeatable because goat's eye, our students get it from those shops for just 10 or 15 rupees, and they plan their days in such a way that they can use the fresh eyes for dissection and understanding the structures. So if seeing is believing, feeling is learning, and exploring is experiencing. So that's what we recommend, that this can be considered as a bridge course for postgraduate students in the beginning for the first 2 or 3 months for postgraduate. And for undergraduates, yes, it's a very superior teaching method. It stimulates multimodal learning. It suits different learners. Some are kinesthetic learners, some are visual learners. It helps everybody. At the same time, it is well received as an innovative teaching method. We had a study done and we got it published where we have written the experiences of the students, where they have narrated how they felt first time when they opened the eye and tried to see the structures. So definitely this may be considered for a bridge course. There are other methods which are helpful, like animation, which I am very fond of. And they help in this clarifying many concepts, like they help in visualizing what we really normally don't do, like the structures of the chiasma, the visual field effects, understanding the various progression of the visual field effects in different conditions. One is the neurological conditions and the other one is the glaucoma. It also helps in teaching about refraction, which is very, very, I'm fond of teaching refraction using animations. So it helps in telling the students, teaching the students how the rays actually come out, because they are all invisible. They have to imagine. So animations help in making the student understand how these rays come out and how they meet and how they move and how refraction is done and all that. various reflexes can be easily taught. And yes, I'll finish fast. So it simplifies the very complex issues. It also, animations also help in adding inputs through speed of the animation, direction of the animation, adding colors, size, shape, and many other aspects that you can explore. The animation simulation methods are very well known, and we have this Anatomage and simulators for understanding the different pathological changes in the retina. These are all well known. Akriti is also having that. But we also tried this tomato technique and the peeling of the boiled potatoes in our center, where one student, Raksha, has done a small study under the guidance of Dr. Sheetal, and she will be trying to publish it also. So in the lockdown period, converting a wet lab into a veg lab was definitely useful to boost the morale of the students. And lastly, quizzing. I'm very fond of quizzing, and I find that quizzing helps learning a lot. So if we can have a topic of, say, glaucoma and have a lot of questions in the form of quiz, it helps in testing their memory, also logic. The Bloom's taxonomy, which we were referring to, it helps in logical, analytical thinking. Also, it helps in presence of mind, because finally that is what helps the students in the clinics. And also it is fun. So with these four, I'm just ending my slide with this picture. If you can see this picture, this is all our postgraduate students who are sitting in different positions. And what we were actually doing was trying to understand the anatomy of the third nerve nuclear complex. So this is the LPS, central caudate nucleus, which is bilateral, whereas these three are the ipsilateral subnuclei of the third nerve. This is the contralateral subnucleus of the third nerve. And these are the two other cranial nerves, that is fourth cranial nerve and the sixth cranial nerve. So we had a lot of fun in understanding, and we changed positions. The PGs changed position. Okay, now I'm going to become inferior rectus. Now I'm going to become the lateral rectus. And they really got involved. They themselves became the subnuclei and tried to understand the structure, which was very useful. So innovations don't have to be sophisticated. Innovations don't have to be expensive or technology dependent. Innovations can be simple, artistic, and fun and unique. There's no cost price, only interest that is what is required. Just like for Ishan Avasti had a good teacher, we also try to become good teachers for our students. So finally, for the postgraduate students, as they learn, as they teach, they learn better. So with that message, I close. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Uma. I think you have done a great justice to the topic, and you have created so many, ideas for us to kind of extrapolate and to take home. I think this really makes the whole job of teaching very stimulating, and probably it's a lifelong learning. And thanks for teaching all this, for making our teaching much more productive and also very interesting. You can stop sharing your screen, Dr. Uma.
Yes, sir. Yes, I'm doing that. Thank you.
I think, sir, I request that we'll finish the last talk, and then we'll have a discussion till 6:30, because we have got a strict orders to stop finish before 6:30 because of the inauguration following this. I think we'll have Dr. Giridhar Bellamkonda, who will be talking about the quintessential part of any postgraduate training, the research and publication, and the thesis is something that they need to actually complete as a mandatory thing. So Dr. Giridhar from Warangal will be taking this onerous task of how to help the student in getting this thesis, how to select it, how to conduct it, how to help him out so that he can pass the thesis and then pass the exam successfully. Dr. Giridhar, please.
So at the outset, thank you, Telangana Ophthalmic Society, giving me a wonderful chance. Dr. Santosh Honavar, and for this session, the eminent Dr. Ashok Grover, Krishna Prasad, my alma mater was Minto, and I'm happy to see Dr. Sujata. And I know all of you have got more PG students than me. I just wanted to ask that question first. I'll start off with that. Dr. Sujata, how many PG students do you have combined 3 years?
You're muted.
Sorry, sir. We have about 70 postgraduates now, considering the first, second, and third year.
Okay, then
That's a huge number, sir.
Hyderabad is beating you by a large margin. The last
Yeah.
I had asked Dr. Modini, she said astounding figure of 135.
We have
That is more than more than a 100 undergraduate class.
But
So
we have
a-
fellows and we have fellows about 12 each year, 12 to 16 fellows.
So how do you manage all that? So that these questions we can have for another session.
Yeah.
So, so when I became REH superintendent, I didn't know this. I was also HOD. Actually, I wanted to become superintendent. I became. Then HOD was somebody said no. You don't actually become a teacher. You are actually the job is put into you. So I would like to start my screen sharing. And this topic actually I prepared yesterday and a little bit this morning. Mr. Vinay, can you share the? I had gone to preview room yesterday. I couldn't share it with my device.
Sir, kindly open your PPT, sir.
No, I had asked Mr. Vinay
Okay,
to share
sir.
it.
Okay,
And
sir.
also at the beginning of the session, I had ensured that he is there in the meeting.
Okay, sir. We'll share it.
So this is one of the things of teachers handling Zoom meetings.
Technology.
Challenge to be in e-teaching.
So we will be very comfortable with a blackboard and a chalk piece of chalk.
No, not really. A computer is fine, and even a LCD projector is fine. But when it comes to Zoom meetings,
but sir, how many of us actually still love blackboard teaching? And still, is it relevant?
Me, sir.
Who's that, Uma?
Yes, I love it. I like to draw the diagrams on the board, show them all these structures, whether it is for UGs or PGs. I still enjoy doing it.
Yeah, you're a wonderful teacher.
can you put
I also
it? Yeah. Go
Sir,
on, ma'am.
slides are visible, sir.
Yes, slides are visible. Dr. Giridhar, you can continue, sir.
Can you put it in full screen? That is full screen.
It's on the
That is
screen.
full screen.
Okay. So as I said, I became superintendent 3 years back, and suddenly I realized by tradition also I had to become HOD. So that's how I became a head of department. But before that, around 20 years, I've been teaching formally and informally. But when it came to thesis, suddenly I had a big job, and I felt I was in the I was being tested a lot. Next slide. Okay, dissertation thesis, this. Next. So is the topic appropriate to the workplace? What is the size of your hospital? What is the next, the general hospital near you? How much can the student do and report on time within these 3 years? And it's not really 3 years, because the first 6 months to 1 year is spent on settling down, learning the OP procedures and the surgeries. But the real thesis work starts, the actual work starts in the final year and maybe a little bit in the second year. So, and the selecting the topic is one of the most difficult things, and I always feel every year I just dread those week or two when we have to submit the topic to the university. And these the topics, at least for the topics which have been there since time immemorial. So the same topics keep repeating every 5 years. So can I offer any fresh perspective, or can my postgraduate offer any fresh perspective to the topic? Next. So the guide must obviously have understanding of the topics and the facilities available, and the student also should be receptive. So, and generally we as senior teachers could have outdated ideas. Next slide. You can ask the student, suggest, especially if he's smart and alert girl or boy, you just ask him to identify a problem question which has not been researched. So he has to go to the library, look up the past thesis, and that will take a week or two on that. Next. Then, as somebody was saying, professors, it used to be 2, now it is 3. I think in some university, MCI is 3, you can have 3 MS students, each professor. So you have to sit with each student at a suitable time and place, and create a sort of a timetable, a schedule in the previous. You have to fix the short-term goal, like a particular subheading you will deliver by this day afternoon at 4 p.m. So that will focus the students' attention, and the teacher also will make time so that he can take the draft, like he can suggest some corrections, or he can take it home and then go through that. Next. So student has to make the student take the thesis seriously, he has to be told that the thesis is a valuable document. It's a scientific report which can be consulted by his other colleagues, future residents, and even faculty. And nowadays these are stored in digital form, so they can be easily accessed. Unlike the previous one, you had to dust off all the dust from the cover, and you may not like to do that, and you can just say forget it. But now you can be very easily retrievable nowadays. And countries, small countries like Egypt also, you have this digital library of past theses. So I was just wondering how many of us, of our universities have this. So Telangana being a new state, the university has just started about 3 years back. Started only about 3 years back, and whether it obviously doesn't have any stored thesis in the digital form. Okay. Next slide. So sometimes we have conflicts in selecting, not only selecting the topic, but there is a generation gap between the teacher and the student. So the today's youths are up to date on internet, social media, and their own peer groups, Snapchat and whatnot. So the guide should know his limitations, and in that he should learn these things from the student. Obviously, this goal has to be courteous to the student, and he will learn probably a little more than what the student learns. The student learns only about the thesis topic, whereas the teacher learns in the process. He is probably learning little more, not subject but other matters. And since it's an interpersonal reaction, it is like a teamwork, where this team has 2 members. Next. And can you go back to the previous slide? So the teacher should always, previous slide please. The teacher, the last sentence. The student can, within a few days of joining the department, he knows what are the strength and weakness of the teacher. So it is not, you cannot hide your strengths or weaknesses. So that should be, you should be honest about that. Next slide. And one point is external examiners are reading the thesis. So, but you should always not keep that in mind. You should always say that in these 3 years you have read up this topic and you are the expert on this. Probably in the entire world you should feel that. You should make the student feel that you are the expert in this topic of your thesis. And you have to write the thesis in such a way that you are teaching somebody all that is there to know on this limited topic. Next slide. So this 4 drafts approach to the thesis, this I found very interesting to help the students write the thesis, actually write it. So most of them depend on this DTP operators and this shop internet cafes. So before that, it's always better to write bullet points. That is a draft and the outline. This is followed by the bullet points. The student bullet points he writes alone. Then he sits with the guide and brainstorms all the thoughts, if possible, with the other people who is under the same guide. So here, obviously, the sentence order, everything doesn't matter. Next slide. The third draft is you shift and sort, and the fourth draft is you expand all these bullet points into full-blown sentences. And next slide. The final draft is the finishing touches of the preening stage, where you give the finishing touch to your sculpture. That is the thesis. Now, next slide, I come to a very important point. This statistician, one has to be a good statistician, which I'm not, I can honestly admit now, but I plan to change that in the next 1 year. So you should know all about how to formulate a research question. And now this BCBR course is compulsory for students and teachers alike. And COVID has pushed back the exam by a month or 2. So we are learning so many new things which we didn't so far. Next question, next slide. So it's worth investing also, even if you know all the statistical markers and the parameters, it's worth investing for the college in a good statistician who can help all the departments. Next slide. Next slide, I'll just skip through this. Next. 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 So this is a very important point I thought I'll highlight, because in India, if you really want to be honest, most of the theses are where, I'm sorry, I should not say are, where copy and paste. And maybe you change a few words here and there. So that has to be stopped, and we can make a start doing that. So number one, you must state where in the scientific literature you found this topic or whatever you want to record in the thesis. If you don't invent it, you have to cite it. If you didn't invent it, you have to cite it. The only exceptions are cases where every scientist in the field already knows it, like tachypnea, pneumonia, edema, pedal edema, and congestive cardiac failure. Next. So these are the many examples of plagiarism. So apart from copy paste, we tend to use photographs, especially without acknowledgement, meaning that anybody could have taken the photograph. But then your photograph which you have used somewhere, you would like that to be acknowledged. So always acknowledge not only text but photographs. And we have to acknowledge others' work, then only our work will get acknowledged.
Dr. Giridhar, I think we are running out of time, sir.
Yes. Next slide. Next. This paraphrasing, I just wanted to see, you can copy the exact word, or you can just change the word, and that is called paraphrasing, which is sort of is in the borderline between plagiarism and not using that. Next slide. Next. So we have to emphasize our strengths and weaknesses. At the end of the thesis, This is the strength of the study and this is the weakness, and therefore any further study is needed. Next. So reading is a good thesis, like consuming a hot chapati prepared with hard work, eaten with delicious honesty of hard dal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I think we're all feeling hungry. So you ended up aptly with the right example. I think now it's almost time to wind up. Thank you very much for really participating with so much of interest and commitment for this teachers program, the Shiksha TOS. I think I have to thank all the expert panel who spared their time to take this event very seriously and to share their opinions about the various topics that discussed. And definitely the speakers really did a very wonderful job of sharing such wonderful gems to take home and to make our teaching more innovative, more interesting, probably more fulfilling, and also probably more rewarding for our students. I think with this, it's 6:30 now. I thank Dr. Santosh Honavar, who entrusted me with the responsibility of sketching this program and to also to conduct this program as a moderator. Thanks all the teachers once again. Thank you very much. Long live TOS.
What about your lecture, KP?
Thank you.
So I was doing all this time. I was doing the same thing.
Yeah, you are depriving us of the tips of being a better lecturer. That's not fair.
I did the same thing all these 1.5 hours, sir. I think that was it. So thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, KP. Thank you, Dr. Kulkarni. Thank you,
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Santosh.
Thank you,
Lovely
everyone.
program. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We thank all the faculties for making the day 1 a grand success. See you tomorrow at 8:30 for the day 2 of the programs. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.